In West Africa, a war is being fought that has little to do with borders and everything to do with power. At the center of it stands a 36-year-old soldier, Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. Since rising to power in a 2022 military coup, Traoré has painted himself as a revolutionary voice for the oppressed and a target of hidden enemies. According to his allies, he survived 19 attempts on his life. Whether whispered through military channels or shouted from podiums, the threat against him has become central to his public image. But who actually wants him dead? And why has he become such a lightning rod inside and outside his country? In this breakdown, we follow the trail of enemies, gunfire, and high-level betrayals to uncover what might really be happening behind the image of a man under siege. Let's begin with where it all started. Burkina Faso's political landscape had already been upended once in 2022. President Roch Kaboré was overthrown in January by Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, but promises of restoring order fell flat. Insurgent violence worsened, and by September, dissatisfaction inside the military boiled over again. This time, the figure at the center was Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Little known before the coup, Traoré led a group of younger officers who accused Damiba of failure and betrayal. After a brief standoff, Damiba was removed, and Traoré was named interim president in October 2022. At just 34 years old, he presented himself as a break from the old military elite. His message was aggressive, anti-French, and focused on reclaiming national sovereignty. His rise triggered immediate changes. The French military presence was ejected. Russian flags appeared in the streets during pro-government rallies. State media began promoting the idea of Traoré as a revolutionary, someone who would finish the work that previous leaders abandoned. Inside the armed forces, however, tensions grew. Senior officers aligned with Damiba were sidelined. Some were detained. Loyalty became the defining line for advancement. Traoré's government hardened quickly, and accusations of internal betrayal began to surface. The first rumors of plots against him emerged in early 2023. By September that year, a real mutiny was confirmed. Military prosecutors announced they had disrupted a coup plot involving members of the security forces. Several arrests followed. Traoré tightened security further, restricting access even among his own ranks. It became harder to know who had his trust and who didn't. In public, Traoré began referring more directly to threats against his life. Over time, the number 19 became part of his narrative. 19 assassination attempts, none successful. The details were vague, and most incidents were not independently verified, but the message resonated. Each claimed attempt added to his image as a man under siege, surviving through sheer resilience and divine favor. His support base leaned into it. They saw him as the target of both foreign interests and corrupt insiders. In turn, Traoré amplified that fear. He framed his survival as proof of a higher mission, casting himself as the protector of a country in crisis. In the absence of transparency, his myth grew stronger. What started as a coup against Damiba had become something else entirely. Traoré wasn't just running the state. He was becoming the face of a nation in permanent confrontation, with insurgents, with international critics, and increasingly, with people in his own uniform. By the time Traoré marked his first full year in power, internal threats had moved from rumor to confirmed reality. In a country where the military has often governed by force, loyalty within the ranks is never guaranteed. Traoré knew this. He had risen through a coup, and he understood that someone else could do the same to him. The first major conspiracy came to light in late September 2023. Government officials announced they had stopped a group of military officers from attempting to overthrow the regime. It was not just talk. Arrests were made. Several mid-level officers were detained on charges of trying to destabilize state institutions. State media reported that intelligence services had been monitoring the plot for weeks. No names were released initially, but insiders confirmed that at least one of the accused had served under Damiba. This attempt was the first concrete signal that Traoré's control over the armed forces was not absolute. What followed was a wave of internal vetting. Officers close to the plotters were removed from posts or placed under surveillance. Military commands were reshuffled across regions, especially in Ouagadougou in the north, where discontent among soldiers had been growing. Traoré's team insisted the crackdown was necessary to prevent a repeat of past instability. But to many observers, it marked a shift toward deeper paranoia inside the junta. Then, in January 2024, another disruption surfaced. Though details were more tightly controlled this time, reports confirmed that an operation had been neutralized before it could take shape. Again, the suspects were from within the military. The government labeled the group as traitorous elements and reaffirmed that foreign intelligence services had no involvement. Still, speculation swirled. Was this a new faction of opposition or remnants of the earlier plot reorganizing? The language coming out of Traoré's administration became more forceful. The president warned of infiltration and sabotage. He began describing a fight not just against terrorism, but against betrayal inside his own military. He suggested that loyalty alone would not be enough. Active proof of commitment would be required. It became clear that he was trying to smoke out any lingering resistance before it could consolidate. By early 2025, the pattern had become familiar. Periodic arrests, sudden transfers, and unexplained disappearances within military command structures fed the growing sense of instability. One of the most high-profile incidents occurred in April 2025, when gunfire was reported in parts of Ouagadougou just after midnight. Panic spread on social media. Within hours, the government released a statement claiming it had dismantled another attempted coup. This time, the plot was described as well-organized, involving both field commanders and officers within the capital. The statement emphasized that the group aimed to remove Traoré by force and install a transitional authority. Arrests were made the same night. National broadcaster RTB suspended regular programming to air the government's version of events. Traoré did not appear in public until days later. Despite the arrests, questions remain. No official footage of the suspects was released. The names were kept from the public. Opposition figures claimed the government was exaggerating the danger to justify further crackdowns. Meanwhile, Traoré's supporters insisted the incident was real and that the president's survival proved divine protection. Whatever the truth, the consequences were immediate. Security was ramped up across military sites. Officers suspected of disloyalty were quietly removed or demoted. The rhetoric grew darker, hinting that the president was surrounded by enemies not just in the streets, but in his own war rooms. For a leader in his early 30s, Traoré was moving through the same cycle that had consumed others before him: power, fear, and control. Each attempt, real or claimed, brought him closer to the edge of becoming both ruler and prisoner of the state he built. By the time Burkina Faso cut military ties with France in early 2023, the message had already been sent. Traoré was repositioning the country away from its colonial-era partner and toward a new set of alliances that would dramatically shift the balance of influence in the Sahel. His rhetoric was unapologetic. He accused France of undermining Burkina Faso's sovereignty and failing to help in the fight against terrorism. His government gave French troops 1 month to leave the country. They complied. This act alone did not explain the growing talk of foreign-backed plots, but it did lay the foundation for what came next: the suggestion that Traoré's enemies were not just domestic. They were also international. In public speeches and state media reports, the narrative expanded. The coups were not only being planned by rogue officers, they were allegedly being supported or encouraged by unnamed foreign powers. Though no official accused France by name, the implications were clear. The government began using phrases like external manipulation and foreign influence networks. In one televised address, Traoré stated that Burkina Faso will never be a puppet in the hands of powers who no longer accept our independence. The audience knew who he meant. So did the French government. which responded by denying any role in Burkina Faso's internal affairs. Still, Traoré's pivot toward Russia added more fuel. In the months following the French military exit, Russian advisors and Wagner-linked operatives began arriving in the country. Traoré's administration described the cooperation as technical support in counterterrorism operations. Western analysts described it as a security for influence exchange. Either way, it drew a sharp contrast with France's role, which had centered on air support and regional logistics, but had failed to stem the growing insurgencies in the north and east. By 2025, Burkina Faso was being discussed in global think tanks as one of Russia's new beachheads in Africa. Alongside Mali and Niger, it formed part of the so-called Sahel Axis, three post-coup regimes united by their rejection of Western influence and growing military cooperation with Moscow. This alignment created new tension points. It also made Traoré a visible figure in a broader geopolitical shift. Where once he had been a local actor in a domestic power struggle, now he stood at the center of a continent-wide realignment. That visibility came with consequences. Western embassies in the region began reducing engagement. Sanctions were proposed within the European Union targeting individuals connected to the Burkina military leadership. The United States cut non-humanitarian aid. France, meanwhile, remained diplomatically silent, but continued intelligence gathering in the region. According to security briefings leaked to regional outlets in March 2025, French intelligence had increased surveillance over regional destabilization networks, including Burkina channels. Whether or not any foreign agency had directly supported plots against Traoré remained unproven, but the distrust was real. Traoré spoke about it often, not in the language of evidence, but in the language of caution. He reminded his supporters that revolutions rarely die naturally. They are, he warned, taken down from the outside. The April 2025 coup attempt brought those fears into sharper focus. Though the suspects were all Burkina, state media ran segments linking them to external sympathizers. No names, no countries, but the pattern was clear. Every act of internal disruption was now framed within an international threat model. Even the economic decisions began to reflect this distrust. Burkina Faso shifted its central bank planning toward a regional gold-backed currency, being developed with Mali and Niger. It cut funding to French-tied NGOs. It introduced new vetting for foreign journalists and restricted access to sensitive security zones. For Traoré, the story was no longer just about staying in power. It was about defending the state from a neo-colonial comeback. That framing worked well domestically, but it raised the cost of failure. If another coup came and succeeded, any incoming regime would be measured not just by its ability to govern, but by whether it had help from abroad. Inside this climate of suspicion, real threats and imagined ones became increasingly hard to separate. But for Traoré, that distinction may no longer matter. Whether it's bullets, betrayals, or political sabotage, the enemy is always out there, watching, waiting, and ready to strike again. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's survival story is not just a matter of bullets and betrayal, it's also a tool. Since his rise in 2022, the narrative that he has survived 19 assassination attempts has been repeated in speeches, rallies, and across pro-government media. These claims are not consistently documented, and many are unverifiable. But that hasn't stopped them from becoming a central part of his public identity. In a region where military leaders often fall as quickly as they rise, Traoré's ability to project resilience matters. The number 19 is less about the math than it is about symbolism. It suggests relentless pressure, high stakes, and divine protection. It paints Traoré as someone who is not just fighting enemies, he's outlasting them. For his supporters, especially young people disillusioned with previous governments, this image has power. The way this narrative is told mirrors stories of other African leaders who resisted external control. Traoré often invokes the memory of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's former revolutionary leader assassinated in 1987. Sankara, too, faced plots and was ultimately betrayed by those closest to him. Traoré presents himself as someone who has learned from that history. He warns against complacency, encourages self-reliance, and speaks of Burkina Faso standing alone if necessary. Every confirmed coup attempt, like the one in September 2023 or April 2025, feeds this story. But so do the unverified threats. Each time the government announces a plot, whether details are shared or not, it reinforces the idea that Traoré is in constant danger. His continued presence becomes a kind of proof that the revolution is still alive, that the fight is not over, and that he is somehow meant to see it through. Internally, this message serves another purpose. It justifies purges, it rationalizes crackdowns, it allows the state to act decisively against military officers, political rivals, and even civilians under the banner of national defense. Dissent is recast as disloyalty. Skepticism becomes complicity. The government frames security decisions not as overreach, but as necessity in a time of siege. This framing has extended beyond military politics. Journalists who question government actions are accused of undermining the state. Activists who call for democratic timelines are labeled as working against stability. When the president is presented as a man who has escaped death 19 times, any opposition can be painted as part of the next plot. Yet this strategy has limits. By mid-2025, some civil society groups began expressing fatigue. A few questioned the accuracy of the assassination claims. Others warned that fear-based politics could lead to more repression. International observers noted the risk of security theater, where threats are exaggerated to tighten control. But for now, those warnings remain on the margins. Traoré continues to build on the image. He makes few public appearances without heavy protection. State television runs montages of his speeches and military visits. He rarely speaks without reminding his audience of danger. Whether or not every attempt was real, the consequences have been. The coups were real. The arrests were real. The fear is real. This narrative, built over months and reinforced through each crisis, has become a shield. It protects him from critics, justifies hardline decisions, and deepens loyalty among his inner circle. It turns a young officer into a myth in the making, one where survival is more than endurance. It becomes a mission. If you found this breakdown revealing, there's a lot more ahead. We're just getting started. So if you're ready to keep uncovering the forces behind the headlines, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.